All right, ladies and gentlemen, time for us to get started. It's actually 7 p.m. Eastern. So thanks so much for coming here tonight. I know there are so many different things that you can do. And I know for some of you, it's actually very late at night. We have a few people from Africa and Europe. And for some of you, it's early in the morning. We also have some people from Asia. So thanks again for joining. It means a lot because you are very serious about your future success and about your career success and your MBA degree, and of course, your success on the GMAT. So I'm just taking my hat off you. I obviously love the GMAT and love what I'm doing, but I really like that you've decided to come here. And my goal here will be to serve you and to actually teach you some strategies, but also talk a little bit about how do you study for the test. Whether you come and study with us or you decide to study on your own, I'm going to give you a formula for studying. I'll give you a plan. And if you follow that plan, whichever resources you use, you will be able to get your dream score in just a few months. And for some of you, might be a few weeks. So if you've heard of people studying for years, they probably just don't know this formula, don't know this plan, or just focusing on the wrong thing. So we're going to cover that all today. And even at the end, we're going to have a little bit of time left to talk about the rest of the application process. So hopefully we're going to deliver a lot for you in these 2 hours. We're not going to be taking any break. What I would like to also suggest is you grab that pen and paper, take some notes, and actually participate actively. There's a chat box, there's a Q&A box, there's going to be some polls. You could always ask a question. If you have a question that's more personal in nature that you wish we address at some point, please put it in the Q&A box. And if you have a question that you would like for us to address immediately, it's in the chat box. So I already see a question from Shane. I'd like to know study strategy adjustment for the 2 new types of GMAT. And the old GMAT, yes. So we will be talking about that as well, about what's the difference between the current version of the test and the new version of the test. And I'm going to have some interesting offers and promotions for you from the GMAT, as well as from us as well. So a lot to cover. Let's actually get started. I'd like to get you a bit outside of your comfort zone. I obviously can't see you just because of a very large number of people here in the class. We have over 100 people here today. Usually in our regular class, we have only about 10 or 15 people, so I can have all of you on webcams. But I'll trust that you go through these exercises, and the exercise is going to be very simple. We're just going to do some GMAT questions. And obviously, the GMAT is a very practical exam. It's learning by doing. So I'll teach you some concepts, but I also would want to make sure that you can apply them by actually giving you some very practical questions that appeared on past exams. So why don't we dig directly into the GMAT, kind of jump into the deep end of the pool, and let me give you a critical reasoning question. If you've never seen the critical reasoning questions, don't worry. I will explain what to do. Just try your best. This is a verbal reasoning section, so you don't really need to know anything. In fact, this question is going to be about human evolution. So I'm sure that you realize that you don't need to know anything about human evolution. There are no numbers, so no formulas to use. There is pretty much just 2 people having a dialogue, and the question is about what are they doing. So there you go. I'll give you about 30 seconds or so to read this dialogue and try to make sense of it. And then I'll come back with the next steps. All right, ladies and gentlemen, pretty straightforward. Yeah, some of the people are saying, let's move on to the next step. So yeah, a pretty straightforward dialogue. So let's actually move on to the next step. The question was, what is Jamal doing? There are 2 people having a dialogue. Sasha is saying something, Jamal is saying something else. So what exactly is Jamal doing? Here are the 5 options. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to pick what option do you think is Jamal choosing. So actually, what is he doing? When you think you know what the answer is, just please choose it. And when I see that most people have answered, we are going to talk about this question. About 15 more seconds to choose an answer, and then we'll talk about this question. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me go ahead and end the poll. So we have a question, how long should it take for these types of questions? So on average, you're going to have about 2 minutes in total for questions like this. We'll touch upon the timing, but let me clearly share the results with you. So as you could see, a bit of a tie between B and E, A, and a few people for A, C, and D. So looks like we have answers for every question, every answer choice. So it's a challenging question. And when you go back to the passage, you'll realize that the topic's fairly straightforward, right? It's human evolution. It's about what people ate throughout the human evolution. And obviously, Sasha is saying one thing, that we should eat more meat because that's what we've always done when we were chasing tigers. And Jamal was saying, wait a second, today we don't really do that. So maybe that doesn't apply anymore, right? And that's probably as deep as we want to go into this topic, because very obviously, when you go into your MBA program, you're not necessarily going to learn human evolution. And in fact, if you ask me a question, how much do you need to know about human evolution to be very successful in the MBA program? I think the answer is pretty obvious, 0. So it's not really about understanding what these people are trying to say. It's much more about what they're trying to do. In fact, this is a question about arguments. We'll talk about arguments a little bit later, but you would notice that the choices don't even have any reference to human evolution. In A, we're talking about refuting her statement about ancestors. Interestingly, in B, we're saying bring forth a piece of information for the purpose of suggestion should qualify her main conclusion. Wait a second, where do we even talk about ancestors or diet or human evolution? Right? So the words we should focus on are actually very different. And in C, we're talking about supporting it, broadening conclusion. In B, we're talking about qualifying the conclusion. In D, we're talking about some assumptions about her conclusions about human evolution. And in E, we were talking about expressing some doubts whether human beings are as healthy as our prehistoric ancestors were. So you can see that there are certain keywords that we'll probably need to pay attention to. And what I've noticed, and I've been teaching the GMAT for 14 years now, that many people would focus a lot on trying to understand the content of a question and not focus enough on trying to answer the question. And the question here was, what was Jamal doing? So was he refuting? Was he qualifying? Was he broadening it? Was he expressing doubts? Right? Now, interestingly enough, E was a very popular answer. So why don't we start with E? Maybe let's see if that's the right answer. So E says expressing doubts about whether most human beings today are as healthy as our prehistoric ancestors were. Now, remember what Jamal was saying. He was saying human beings today are not as physically active as our prehistoric ancestors were. So answer choice E doesn't talk about being physically active. It talks about being healthy. And this is one of the examples of how the GMAT is going to try to use our everyday habits to try to trick us into picking the wrong answer. E is not the correct answer. Because let me ask you, ladies and gentlemen, is being healthy the same as being physically active? Now, if you think about this, if you're trying to compare perhaps two groups of people, both are from our time, and the first group of people is very physically active, and the second one is not, generally, we'll realize that the group of people who are physically active are healthier. But we are not trying to compare two groups of people who live today. We're trying to compare people today with our prehistoric ancestors. So being healthy is not the same as being physically active. We equivocate these two terms, but they're not necessarily the same. And I'm sure that if you know a little bit about human evolution, you'll probably realize that even a couple hundred years ago, people barely lived to 40 or 50, but now many people live to 90 or even 100. So certainly the healthcare system has improved. Right, so making an assumption and mixing up the terms is very common, and that's why E was incorrect. So let's actually look at other answer choices. Now, A says refuting her statement about prehistoric ancestors. So basically saying whatever she said about prehistoric ancestors, that was not true. He never said this, right? He was just saying people today are not as physically active. Maybe that's why they shouldn't eat so much meat. So that's why A is definitely wrong. B talks about qualifying the conclusion. C talks about broadening the conclusion. Now, it's okay if you don't know what this means. We'll come back to this. We've eliminated A, we've eliminated E. Let's take a look at D. D says, question whether her assumption about our prehistoric ancestors permits any conclusions about human evolution. So basically he's saying your conclusion about human evolution is all not true and you're making some assumptions about ancestors. No, she never actually questioned her assumptions or her conclusion about the evolution. He was just talking about people today versus people then. So you would see that we're down to two answer choices. And what's interesting is very often, especially in harder questions, I was doing a couple of tutoring sessions today, and it was very obvious that there was a very tricky way for the GMAT to provide a question where the answer could really go either way. And you just had to think a little one step further to see which way it goes, because one of these actually goes one way and one of them the other way. To qualify is actually the direct opposite than to broaden. When I qualify something, I'm going to narrow down my definition. When I broaden it, I expand it, right? And again, if you don't use the words qualify every day, that's okay. I don't either. But qualify means, what it really meant is, if I were to say, I live in Toronto. So if I were to say, look, everybody in Toronto loves hockey, that probably is not true, but I can qualify this by saying, well, everybody who was born in Toronto and has seen the Maple Leafs games at least 5 times, they love hockey, right? So I qualified it. I said, it doesn't really always apply, it just applies in some cases. And broaden it would be, well, wait a second. It's not just people in Toronto, it's people in the whole Canada who love it. So now I'm broadening it, right? So that's a difference. And I think once we understand that difference, and once we understand a bit of a structure and more like the composition of the questions and how they're created, how they're crafted, once we start thinking like the people who actually make the questions, once we start understanding these patterns, we can get to the answer fairly quickly and sometimes even effortlessly. And I think once we do this analysis, you realize that the answer, of course, has to be B. Now, he's trying to qualify her conclusion. And the word qualify, by the way, is the word that the GMAT uses quite often. So if you don't know this word, then it would definitely be worth it looking it up or writing it down. But what's important, ladies and gentlemen, from this question, and if you have any questions, just please throw them in the chat box, is to understand that the GMAT is not a normal test. And if you've been studying a little bit already, or if you have friends who've been studying, and especially friends who've been successful in the GMAT, they'll probably tell you that the GMAT is very different from a standard college level exams. Because what do most exams test? Think about an exam in, say, biology. Well, you got to know some biology, hopefully the names of species and so on. But on the GMAT, you're trying to get into a business school, and you might get a passage on biology, or you might get a passage on business or geology or geography. It doesn't really matter because you're not supposed to know anything about this subject matter. This is not a subject matter exam. This is not a knowledge-based exam. It is a skills-based exam. Now, you do need to have some basic knowledge, of course. I mean, you need to know in the current version of the test, what's a triangle and what's a quadratic equation, and you need to understand the difference between a subject and the object. But this is not really what it's all about. It is about demonstrating these skills. And we'll talk about how the exam is changing, and you also realize that that becomes even more important in the new version of the test, the GMAT Focus, that's coming up in a few months. So I mean, ladies and gentlemen, honestly, if this is the only thing you can take away from this class today, it would be that the GMAT is not a knowledge-based test, it's a skills-based test. In fact, I'm going to give you another term that I've learned from the GMAC, because we belong to a small group of test prep organizations. Just because we've done this for so long, we actually have a very good relationship with the GMAC. I know personally many people from the GMAC, CEO, and we're I could say we're friends with the GMAC, though of course they'll never give us real questions, but they do recognize the value of the work that we do. So they invite us every year. We have a nice dinner and we talk about overall what's going on in the industry. And the one interesting thing that they always do is they also talk about the GMAT algorithm and how the GMAT is changing and things like that. And one of the things I've learned is that the GMAT is what's called a psychometric test. And psychometric essentially means it's a test that evaluates your brain activity. By asking you questions, it tests how you think, which is interesting. It doesn't test what you know, it tests how you think. This is not how most of the tests work. Most of the tests, ladies and gentlemen, just because our educational system, our current educational system, for the most part, has been designed in the 19th and earlier 20th century, when there were no Google, no ChatGPT, when we were told by our teachers that knowledge is power. And most of the exams are built that way. How much do you know something? The physics, how much do you know physics? But the GMAT, I love analogies, so I'm going to use this analogy throughout the class today. The GMAT is, think of this as like a driving test. You know, it's not about how much do you know about driving a car, it's about can you actually drive, right? So even on the GMAT, it's not so much about what you know about biology or even grammar, it's about are you able to answer the questions in 2 minutes or maybe even less under pressure. In fact, let's talk a little bit about the pressure of the test and maybe a little bit about the structure of the test as well. So here's the structure of the current test, and I'll share with you the structure of the new test that's going to replace the current version of the test in a few months. So the current version of the test has 4 sections. And what is interesting is many people, when they think about what do they need to do to prepare for the GMAT, is they'll say, well, I know there's math, so I'm gonna learn a bunch of math. I know there's verbal, so I'm gonna know some English. And this is also the slide that I've seen at the GMAT conference in one of these nice dinners that they invite us to, probably about 6 or 7 years ago, where they said, look, when you talk to your candidates, please make sure you tell them there's no math section on the GMAT. Yes, there are questions with numbers. They're questions that require a bit of knowledge of math, but this is not about knowing math. It's not about knowing English. That's why we have IELTS or TOEFL. It is about reasoning. Quantitative reasoning, so reasoning with numbers, verbal reasoning, reasoning without numbers. It's also about your analytical skills. And it's also about working with data and integrating everything and thinking in multiple dimensions, which is what integrated reasoning was about, which is what data insights is going to be about. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, not a lot of time on the GMAT. You have exactly 2 minutes in the quantitative section, 2.5 minutes integrated reasoning, and about 1 minute 48 seconds on verbal reasoning. So not a lot of time. And analytical writing assessment is an essay. It's a free-form writing essay. You're gonna have half an hour to write it. This is a section that's going away. It really, for the most part, lost its relevance. So you're not going to be faced with an essay in the new GMAT Focus. But honestly, most of us students get a score of 6 or 5.5, and I can teach you in 45 minutes how to write a perfect 6 essay. So that should be your least concern. The quantitative reasoning and the verbal reasoning right now are the sections that you should really invest a lot of time into, because these are the only 2 sections that contribute towards the total score 200 to 800. And these are also the only 2 sections in the current version of the test that are computer adaptive, which means the test adapts to your level. If you are answering the questions correctly, the test keeps getting harder. And if you're answering the questions incorrectly, the test keeps getting easier, right? So sometimes when you walk into a test, let's say integrated reasoning section, currently is not adaptive. So of the 12 questions, about half are easy. So I know I can knock them off. Maybe another quarter to 30% are medium and about 20% are hard. So it's easier to manage my time if I know half of my questions are easy. On the quant and verbal section, I know if I want to get a good score, I'm probably not going to see easy questions at all. I'm going to start with medium difficulty questions, and I'm going to just keep going up in difficulty. And at some point, I'm going to be facing questions that are very challenging. And I still need to make sure I'm managing my time properly. Well, in the new version of the test, the 3rd section, which is now the modified integrated reasoning, will also become computer adaptive. And it will also be a part of the total score. So in the new version of the test, that integrated reason section now becoming data insight will be quite a bit more challenging. Now, because of this computer adaptive algorithm, the GMAT can assess very quickly where you are. Instead of giving you a bunch of easy, bunch of hard, and bunch of medium questions and kind of trying to see which of these you answered correctly, if you're dealing with medium questions, it's not even going to give you the easy questions. I mean, why? You're probably going to get them right anyway, so why waste your time? That's how the GMAT can very efficiently evaluate your level. I mean, think about this. The GMAT is also something that's called a high-stake exam, because in approximately 3 hours, you're going to be getting an assessment on which a lot of your future career is going to depend. And for most business schools, the GMAT score is more important than your GPA in your academic assessment of your academic abilities. And think about this, within 2 to 3 hours, you're going to get an assessment that trumps 4 years of undergrad. So the GMAT has to be very accurate in the assessment. And it does that through the adaptive algorithm. So it's a very sophisticated algorithm. It's one of the most complicated exams in the world. Not to intimidate you, but of course, it's also a standardized test. So there's a way to beat it. So how is the GMAT changing? Somebody's asking a question. So if you're answering more medium and harder questions, then there is a chance you will be given less questions. No, you will not be given fewer questions. You will still have the same number of questions. They will just be harder. Yeah. Sounds like fun, right? Thanks for that question. Tana, you have another question as well? I will get to that. I will get to your question about how to deal with harder questions. So how is the GMAT changing? You probably heard that there's a shorter exam called GMAT Focus that is coming up hopefully sometime in October. We don't have the exact date. We will know the exact date soon. So let's talk about how the exams change, and we'll talk about when would that happen. So the exam, first of all, is getting shorter. It's going to be 2 hours, 15 minutes instead of 3 hours, 7 minutes. You're going to have 3 sections: quantitative reasoning, verbal reasoning, and data insights. You're going to have an average slightly more time per question, quantitative reasoning, verbal reasoning, but just a few seconds, less time in data insights. Data insights is now going to consist of integrated reasoning questions as well as data sufficiency. And if you want to know more about data sufficiency, come to our mass refresher class, which is going to be in exactly 2 weeks from now. Same time, different link, so make sure you register on our website, admitmaster.com. You can now choose any order of the sections, so you can take quantitative reasoning, or verbal reasoning, or data insights first, doesn't really matter. You're gonna have to choose this at the start of the test. You'll also be given one optional 10-minute break that you can take either after the first or after the second section. Certain topics are going to be removed, so no more essay, no more sentence correction on the verbal section, and no more geometry in the quantitative section. And also remember, quantitative reasoning will now contain only problem-solving questions. So you might be wondering, well, should I wait? Should I be taking the current version of the test? That's a really good question. So a few other things are changing in addition to just the timing. Overall, the test also gets recalibrated. There's going to be a new score scale. It's instead of 200 to 800, it's now 205 to 805. There's some procedural differences as well. For example, in the new version of the test, you will be able to come back and review all of your answers when you're done with the section, assuming you still have time, which is kind of hard to do in an adaptive test. And then you'll be able to change up to 3 responses. There are a few other kind of things that are going to change in terms of the procedure. The duration of the test is going to be less. The delivery online or in a test center is going to remain the same, and the price of the test is going to remain the same, is approximately $300 US dollars for the test. What's important also is to understand is that the GMAT does that for several reasons. One of the reasons is to make the test a little more accessible. So, you know, some people might say it's 3 hours too long, so I'd like to take a shorter exam. Or maybe I don't need to learn as many topics, such as maybe geometry. On the same token, they've also realized that there is a bit of an inflation of scores. If you look at the structure of the test or the scoring system 20 years ago, a score of 700 was pretty much the top 1%. Now, a lot more people get 700, and a lot more people do better in quant. So what they've realized is that that bell curve is now no longer a normal distribution. It's very skewed. So they've readjusted the scoring system, and they essentially recalibrated different questions. They went back 5 years and they looked at how people performed on the questions. So for the most part, the questions are the same. That's why when you come to our class right now, whether you want to take the GMAT Focus or the GMAT Current Edition, you'll pretty much be going to the same classes. Just with the GMAT Focus, you won't be actually going to geometry and sense correction classes because the questions for the most part are the same. Just the way that the GMAT works and the algorithm is different. You will also notice that the score of the current score of 700 is going to be actually approximately 640, 635 to 645. There's going to be now a 5 at the end. So it's going to be very, very hard again to get a score of 700. So if you really like that 700 for whichever reason, or you want 750, you can take the current version of the test. There's also in terms of the timing, because the data insight section, the former integrated reason section becomes adaptive, and because there is now going to be only 1 break instead of 2, and also because some of the questions that take a little bit less time, so usually sentence correction for many people take less time, for example, than reading comprehension, and data sufficiency takes less time than problem solving. Overall, there will be more time pressure on the new test. Even though it's a shorter test, it's going to be a little faster paced, even though, again, you have fewer questions. And finally, when it comes to quant, we'll talk about this in 2 weeks, the GMAT is replacing some of the straight solve questions with questions that involve more of the logic. So if you're really comfortable with math, because you can solve many questions on the back of a napkin, in the new version of the test, that's going to be more difficult. There are going to be more traps, more tricks, and less straight math, where you can get by just simply solving a problem. So what this means is that if you are actually planning to take your test, and especially if you're planning to apply for 2024, for the start date of 2024, some of the schools said they are not even going to accept the GMAT Focus. It might actually be worth it taking the current version of the test. If for whichever reason you realize that certain topics like sentence correction and geometry are really hard for you, then you can always switch, and everything that you invested in the GMAT will be applicable to GMAT Focus. The official preps available right now, our courses already teach what's relevant to the GMAT Focus. The registration for the GMAT Focus will be open on August 29th, and you can take the test starting sometime in Q4, which could be 1st of October, it could be 29th of December. We don't yet quite know, but we were told sometime in early Q4, hopefully, when all technology things already get worked out. So here you see my picture. That's me back in May when we got this from a publisher before they were even released to the public. So I just wanted to show you that these books are the books only for the GMAT Focus, the 2023-2024. So if you are planning to take the current version of the test, you should get the 2022 edition. And if you're planning to take, if you don't yet know, you should still take the 2022, because all of the, for the most part, questions in the new edition are just the repurposed old questions. There is a very small number of new questions, but again, these are not brand new questions. There is a question that appeared in some of the other past books. They're no brand new types of questions. Okay, yeah, there are a few questions from a few comments from Shane. So definitely we'll get back to 700 in the current version is going to be around 645, 635. So definitely there's going to be a separate report, and because of the 5 at the end, the schools will know what test that you are taking, right? So if, they will also have the conversion charts, so they'll know that as well. But there's going to be a bit of an adjustment, especially when they're trying to compare exams. So again, if you are planning to start your MBA soon, my advice would be try to take the current version of the test, especially because there's so many resources available. For example, with the GMAT Focus right now, there are only 2 official tests from MBA.com. There are no other mock exams. Whereas for the current version of the test, there are lots of mock exams. You know, we offer you a lot of mock exams. There are more on MBA.com. There's just more resources available. It's just a little bit easier to start study for the current version of the test. But again, whatever you learn is still going to be applicable to the new version of the test. So is the GMAT getting easier? I'll let you answer that question. My advice is, again, if you don't yet know, start studying for the current version of the test. And then as you're getting closer to actually taking your test, take 2 versions of the test. Take the GMAT mock exam and the GMAT Focus mock exam, and see if you do better on either of them, and then go for that one. However, ladies and gentlemen, here's a bit of an incentive for you. If you are planning to take the current version of the GMAT, you can actually save 25% off your exam. And you may have heard of this sale, you may have not. It was supposed to finish 2 days ago, but I just checked this morning. The promo code was still working on MBA.com. So my advice, if you want to save about $100, that's quite a bit of money. Then head down to MBA.com right after the seminar and pick a date. It has to be a test center exam. And generally, I would suggest give yourself, about a month for every 50 points of improvement, depending on how you study. I'll again share with you some of the ideas of how you can structure your studies. Any questions, let me know. But I would like, ladies and gentlemen, to talk a little bit more about the verbal section. Since we are here, this is a verbal refresher. So the quantitative reason section consists of 2 question types. We will be talking about them on August 16th. The verbal reason section consists of 3 question types currently. In the future, only 2, critical reason, reading comprehension. So let's talk about them, since we have all 3 of them in the current version of the test, and that's why we're here today. Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you, I'd like to hear from you. Do you think the verbal section is hard? And most importantly, maybe let me know why it's hard. Here are a few options for you in the poll. I'd love to know here specifically for people here today, why do you think it is hard? What were some of the reasons why you came here today? And what are some of the things you want to overcome? So I see here one of the very popular answers, answer choices seem subjective. Yeah, I mean, think about this. 2 + 2 is always 4, but there are different ways to say the same sentence. So seems like it's a lot less black and white than math, right? A lot more gray. Yeah, that's very, several answer choices look right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, 2 + 2 is always 4. It's not 5, it's not 3, but again, sometimes, especially in sentence correction, they're going to have several answers and they all look good. Maybe one of them's better. There's no such thing as a better answer in quant, but there is a better answer in verbal. So that's certainly a challenge. And many of you mentioned English is not your first language, and lots of grammar rules to remember, of course. Yeah, and boring passages, long passages. So all of these are really good reasons of why we might feel a little intimidated with verbal. But don't worry, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully we're going to bust a few myths today. And hopefully by the end of the class today, especially once you come to our math refresher class, you'll realize the math on the GMAT is a lot more gray than what most people think. Because to assume that the GMAT math is black and white is to assume that we'll have time to do everything to get the correct answer. And that's usually not the case. So sometimes we have to guess. And on verbal, it's actually a lot more black and white than what most people think is. Just most people think it's gray because they don't know what to look for, or they don't know what the GMAT considers a better answer. But once you know that, it becomes a lot more straightforward. So let's actually talk about it. Yeah, somebody mentioned it's our site is lazy to follow the grammar rules. Of course, I mean, we don't speak in the proper written English, right? In the classical English, and there are different variants of English. Some people say one way and some people say another way. So, you know, interestingly enough, if English is your first language and if you've been educated in North America, chances are you've never learned grammar. You just speak English the way you speak just because that's how you always spoke, right? You don't really maybe necessarily know what's a preposition and you know, what's a participle and things like that. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's actually get a little bit more into the sentence correction. Now, some of you mentioned that there are lots of grammar rules in English, and you're absolutely correct. Now, you might be thinking, well, some of the languages have more complicated grammar, like maybe German or French. But the interesting thing about English is it's not really a pure language. It's kind of like German with a bunch of French and Latin words. Right, so we have lots of grammar rules, but we also have lots of words that violate these grammar rules. So lots of exceptions. Another thing about the English language is because it's a very international language, it has way more words than any other language. There are over 500,000 words in the English dictionary, and the next largest language is German with a little over 100,000 words. So 100,000 versus 500,000, can you imagine? So it's easy to feel overwhelmed because grammar is actually tested on the GMAT. But let me give you some good news. First of all, grammar is not the only thing that's tested on the GMAT. What also is tested is the meaning and the style. So the sentence not only has to have a correct grammar, but it also has to convey the meaning clearly and unambiguously. And it also has to use a preferred style. And the preferred style in business is direct, straight to the point. And there's certain rules that you can follow. And certainly if you come to our class, we're going to go through all of these rules for the style and for the meaning. Now, the meaning is something that's very important, but it's something that many people overestimate in its importance. Because the meaning doesn't necessarily mean you have to work really hard to understand the meaning of the sentence. The meaning just simply has to make sense. And it has to be unambiguous, has to be clear. There's certain ways that the GMAT can make it ambiguous or not clear or not making sense. And if you learn these ways, then it'll be a lot quicker for you to recognize when the meaning rules are violated. But you're never going to be asked to explain in your own words what the sentence actually says. So you don't have to worry too much about going very deep into the meaning. Again, this is not a test of content. This is a test of a skill. And ultimately, when it comes to verbal, it's a test of structure. Structure of a sentence, which is what we call grammar. So grammar is a set of rules that dictate how we are going to structure the sentence. And there's many, many, many different rules, and of course, many different exceptions. But here's good news, ladies and gentlemen. There are only about 5 rules that make up the majority of the questions in sentence correction. I would say 80%. And the remaining 20% are probably another 4 or 5 rules. That's it. So you don't need to learn the entire grammar. You just need to learn a little bit of grammar. And again, it's not just about grammar. So let's learn a little bit of grammar. I want to teach you a couple of rules of these 5 or 10, as much as we can do today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you know, But in the English language, any sentence must contain a minimum of 2 words. Does anybody know what 2 words should the sentence contain? Does anybody know? And I love your comments, Shane. Yeah, absolutely. So we're getting lazy with our subject and a verb, a noun and an action. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So we need a subject, which is what the sentence is about, and we need a verb, or also known as a predicate, which is what is the subject doing, right? So we need the sentence to be about someone or something, and that someone or something needs to have some sort of an action, or we might need to describe this something state of being. For example, we can say this desk is black. So the desk is black, the desk isn't doing anything, but we are describing its state of being by using the verb to be. So this is important, right? We cannot have a sentence with 1 word. And of course, on the GMAT, you're never going to have a sentence of 1 word, but you might see a sentence where usually a verb would be missing. And sometimes it's easy to miss that the verb is missing, right? So think about this. We can say, John is reading a book. So we have a subject, John is reading as a verb. What if we say John reading a book? Well, it seems like everything's good. We have subject John and we have verb reading, except that reading is now no longer a verb. It's actually become a participle. So the verb is missing. John reading a book is not a sentence. Sometimes in some of the longer sentences that contain multiple subject and verb pairs called clauses, that's what you're going to see. So you got to keep an eye on this. But what's tested even more often is the rule of a subject-verb agreement, which there are many different ways to violate this rule. But what's tested in the GMAT is an agreement in number. Essentially, if you have a singular subject, you must have a singular verb. And if you have a plural subject, you must have a plural verb. Right? Pretty straightforward. If I say a child plays, they're both singular. And if I say children play, then they're both plural. Many children play, and the verb is also plural. So in the English language, most of the verbs have a plural and a singular form, as well as most of the nouns have a plural and a singular form. Of course, there are exceptions, but most of them. Whew. So why don't we practice a bit? I feel like I've been talking too long, so I'd like to give you some exercises to do. In fact, what I'd like to do is give you a series of sentences where there will be 2 different versions of the verb. One is singular, one is plural, and I'll ask you, which one's correct? So here are the 5 sentences, and I'm going to launch a quick poll. When you think you know what the answers are, please choose them, hit submit, and then we'll talk about this in a moment. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll give you 10 more seconds, and then we'll talk about the sentences. Okay, let me stop the poll and see how well we did. In fact, let me share the results with you. just so that you could see what was going on there. So as you could see, for number one, most of the people for was, some people for were. Number two, everybody for have, everybody for live. Wow, that's impressive. Number three, most of the people for take, a lot fewer people for takes. Number four, again, disagreement. Most of the people for have, fewer people for has, but a little bit closer. And number five, again, is a bit of a draw. More people for has, but quite a lot of people for have. Wow, so it looks like one and certainly two were a bit more clear cut, but 3, 4, and 5 were a little harder. So this is, again, how the GMAT can make things harder for us, right? They are giving us something that we don't necessarily use in our everyday spoken language. So we might have to dig a little bit deeper into the actual structure of the sentence and remember some rules. In number one, the crowd was aware cheering the Raptors. So who was aware cheering the Raptors? Well, obviously a lot of people. I don't know if you know the story behind this sentence. Is in 2019, the Raptors, which is a basketball team from Toronto, for the first time, and so far the only time in history, a Canadian team won the NBA championship. And there was like a huge crowd and a concert in Toronto. It was on Monday, like 2 million people on the streets of Toronto. One crowd that was cheering the Raptors, assuming it was one crowd. So see, if you're talking about a bunch of people or a bunch of something, and you're talking about one group, one family, one crowd, then you need to recognize that this is our subject. It's not the people, it's the actual crowd. So there's one crowd, that's why the crowd was. If we say the crowd members or the members of the crowd, then it would be different. Then the members would be the subject. Number two is pretty straightforward. Amy and Bobby live in Boston. Obviously, there are two people here who live in Boston. In this sentence, it's Amy and Bobby. Amy and Bobby is more than one. So, of course, it's going to be live in Boston. Number three was interesting because most of the people have chosen take, but quite a few people chose takes. So let me ask you this, ladies and gentlemen. Please let me know in the chat box, what is the subject in 3? What's the subject of the sentence number 3? Is it Jason? Is it his 2 friends? Or is it Jason and his 2 friends? It's an important question because it's going to determine what verb you need to use. Yeah, so some people are saying Jason and his 2 friends. Some people are saying it's Jason. Some people are saying his 2 friends. So let me teach a rule for you here. Yeah, some people are saying 2 friends. So let me teach you a rule. It's going to be a very useful rule, and we'll call this the AND rule because here at Admit Master we like to keep things simple. It doesn't matter what the proper terminology is. You want to make sure that you can use it. So let's call it the AND rule. Ladies and gentlemen, you might want to write this down. If you have AND in the sentence, then the subject is always plural. Obviously, if AND is in the subject, right? So Amy and Bobby, that's the AND. You have the AND in the subject, it's always plural. No exceptions. But if you don't have the AND, you really have to think hard. Because most of people use other words as substitutes for AND, right? So when I asked you, what's the subject? Many people here in the chat box, by the way, if you don't see the chat box, don't worry, I see all of your chats. It's just, again, because of the number of people, sometimes we get people making some interesting comments. So I see your chats, don't worry. In a real class, if we were in a group of 10, 15 people, you're going to see each other on the webcam and you will see each other's chats as well. So most of the people here responded Jason and his 2 friends. But there wasn't the word and in the original sentence. It was as well as. And as well as means a different thing than and. So if you might want to write this down, if you wrote the and rule, you might want to write down, in the English language, there is no substitute for the word and. Only the word and creates a list. As well as doesn't create a list. As well as adds extra information. It's not the same as creating a list. If I'm saying Amy, Bobby, and Charlie, that's my list. If I am saying Amy, Bobby, as well as his 2 friends, that's not proper grammar. Right? If I say Amy as well as his 2 friends, my subject is Amy. As well as just some extra information. Sometimes it's separated by commas, sometimes it's not, called the modifier phrase. Basically, no and, you have to be very suspicious and ask yourself a question, what's the subject? And the subject here, ladies and gentlemen, is Jason. That is why the answer is takes, not take. Hope this makes sense. If you have any questions, let me know. Some of you mentioned that two friends are actually the subject. The reason why two friends are not the subject is if I get rid of everything in the sentence and I just leave the subject and the verb, the sentence should still make sense. So Jason takes a GMAT prep course, still makes sense. If I say as well as his two friends take a GMAT prep course, that makes no sense. Because I'm not going to start the sentence by saying as well as, right? I need the subject. So if two friends were the subject, I should have just said two friends take a GMAT prep course. So that was the and rule. A for is actually using a different rule. And it's what we call the or rule. You could start the sentence with two friends. Yeah, I mean, if the sentence was saying two friends as well as Jason, then two friends will be the subject. Absolutely. But here Jason was the subject. So you have to be suspicious, right? And in a subject is automatic plural. No and, it's not automatic plural for sure. So because there's no substitute for and. So you have to see what is the actual subject. Number 4, neither her brothers nor Susan. So this is the or rule, what we call the or rule, and it applies to or, either or, neither nor. The rule is exactly the same. So to make this simple, just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to replace neither with simply or. Brothers or Susan. Now, if we have brothers or Susan, the interesting thing is we actually don't know who's ever been to China. Maybe it's the brothers. Maybe it was Susan. Maybe both. We don't know. So technically, we don't know what verb to use. Logically, if you think about this logically, it could have been just Susan. Right? If we're saying brothers or Susan, it could be just Susan, in which case I should say has. In fact, I know it's going to sound really weird, but if I were to say Amy or Bobby, I should say lives, not live. How many of us use this properly, right? Amy or Bobby lives in Boston. That really hurts my ear, but that's the proper grammar. So sometimes proper grammar doesn't sound right. That's why you don't really want to rely on what sounds well. So the rule is if you have two subjects, two parts of the subject that are split by the word or are in the either or, neither nor construction, then you are going to take just the subject that is the closest to the verb, and you're going to use the number for the verb that's matching the number of just that one subject. So if we say brothers or Susan, we'll say has, because has is closer to Susan. If we say Susan or brothers, we'll say have, because now brothers are closer to have. Interesting rule, right? Called the proximity rule, but something to add to your toolbox. By the way, the better you become in sentence correction, the more of these grammar rules you're going to learn, the more you're going to be tempted correcting other people's grammar. That's a really good way to make friends. Anyway, so the answer to 4 was in fact has. Again, the minority of the people has chosen has. 3 was takes, 4 was has. Finally, the board of directors. So here's a tricky one. So brothers or Susan, whichever subject is closer to the verb, that's what you need to use in order to pick the number for the verb. Susan was closer to the verb has or have. That's why we're going to use a singular version of the verb has, because Susan was closer. Number 5, the board of directors has or have decided. Well, here's an interesting question. Who actually decided, right? Because here we don't have and, the board and directors. We don't say the board or directors. We just say the board of directors. So an argument could be made that it was the board that decided. The board got together and decided to fire the CEO. In which case, we're going to say, of course, has. Now, we can also say the directors. Directors got together and decided to fire the CEO, in which case we'll say have. So which one's better? That's a really good question. There is actually a rule for that. And I'm going to teach you this rule in a moment. And you'll know it's actually a very useful rule. And you'll know whether to use has or have with the board of directors and similar structures on the GMAT. So ladies and gentlemen, one thing we need to realize is not every noun is a subject. We have a lot of nouns in the sentence generally, but only some of them are subjects. These are the ones that have a verb or have some sort of an action attached to them. John is reading a book. Well, John has an action, he's reading, but a book doesn't have an action. So a book's an object, right? And the subject isn't always a person, an object isn't always a book. You can also say the book is being read by John. Well, guess what? The book is now a subject because the book is being read. That's a verb, and John is just an object. That John doesn't do anything. The book's being read. So understanding this is important because when you are being asked to correct a subject-verb sentence, just like the ones that we've done now, obviously on the real test, they're going to be a lot longer, but I hope you can see that even shorter sentences could sometimes be challenging. Then it's important to realize that I'm going to focus on just some nouns, not all of them, because objects don't perform any action. They don't have any verbs. So one of the things I might need to do is actually recognize which one's a subject and which one's not. And obviously, as I'm sure you can guess, if the GMAT is testing the subject-verb agreement, the GMAT is not going to make it easy for us to find the subject and a verb. Oh, sorry, a subject and an object. And a bit of a preview of that was, in fact, the board of directors, a very simplified version of the GMAT, what the GMAT can possibly give you. So how would we break the tie in the board of directors? Well, here's the rule. It's called the rule of preposition. The board of directors was called the prepositional phrase. And the preposition is a short word that connects nouns together. So the board of directors, the of would be the preposition. I'm giving this book to my friend. So to is a preposition. I'm placing this book in the locker. So in the preposition. Precedes nouns. And what's interesting is that almost always it precedes an object. There are very few exceptions when a preposition will precede a clause. So a clause means it precedes a subject that itself has a verb, but that's very rare. Most of the time, especially if you're targeting medium difficulty levels, sentences, then you can just pretty much cross out all of the nouns that have a preposition in front of them. I believe in the entire official guide, there's only 1 or 2 questions where the preposition actually precedes a clause. So very, very small number. So that's why the board of directors, there's only one verb. That's why we can look at this prepositional subject, the board of directors, and recognize that what's after the preposition is not the subject. So what has to be the subject? The board. So the board of directors has to be singular. Of the preposition precedes an object, there are no other verbs, so we don't have to worry about multiple clauses, and it's a pretty straightforward exercise. Cool. I hope you enjoy a little bit of a journey into grammar. We're not quite done, though, with the grammar. I want to teach you one more grammar rule, one more agreement rule, and that's an agreement of pronouns. So what are the pronouns? Well, the pronouns are words such as I, he, she, they, it. They're very short words that replace nouns. Very simple. We take a sentence, instead of saying John is reading a book because John wants to be smarter, we'll say John's reading a book because he wants to be smarter, right? Or John bought apples because they are tasty. Not John bought apples because apples are tasty, right? It just makes our language a little more elegant. That's why we use pronouns. But here's an interesting thing, ladies and gentlemen. If we, by the way, I noticed, Tamara, you've raised your hand. So please put your question in the chat box. Later on, we can unmute you as well. Yeah, put your question in the chat box and I'll certainly address it. So when you're replacing something with something else, chances are we might choose a wrong pronoun, right? I mean, think about this. You're trying to fix a car. Well, you take a part out and you put in a different part in. Well, chances are that part might not fit. The same thing with a sentence. A pronoun might not fit. So you have to make sure when the pronoun is used in a sentence that it actually fits. So how could it not fit? Well, there are a couple of ways it might not fit. Way number one is it might be unclear what it's replacing. And number two, you might not actually agree with what it's replacing. We might use a wrong pronoun or we might put it in the wrong place. Let me give you a couple of examples. Here's the first sentence. Please let me know what you think about this sentence. Are all of the pronouns here used properly? Why yes, why not? What do you think? In the chat box, what do you think? The pronoun she, is it used properly here? Yes or no? Yeah, a few people are saying yes, yes. Yeah, many people are saying yes. I mean, yeah, Melissa decided to visit Elizabeth in the hospital because Melissa was feeling unwell. Okay, it's very unclear. Okay, yeah. Some of the people are saying, yeah, it's correct because pronoun should follow the noun. Yes, a few other people are saying yes, yes, yes. Okay, wow, ladies and gentlemen, it's not. I know it sounds a little strange. I mean, logically, Melissa is going to the hospital and Elizabeth is in the hospital. So we can assume that Elizabeth is not feeling well. But you know, chances are Elizabeth is a doctor and Melissa is deciding to visit a doctor in a hospital because Melissa is not feeling. So we can't really use logic here, or at least it's not that straightforward. So we really have to ask ourselves the question, who is she? I mean, she could be Melissa, or it could be Elizabeth. It's not clear. It's ambiguous. That also goes back to the meaning of the sentence is, remember we said the meaning has to be clear. I'm reading this and I'm like, who's feeling unwell? I'm not sure. That means it's not the right sentence. If I want to fix this sentence, and remember, you're not going to have to rewrite the sentence and write the perfect sentence. You just need to pick the one among the answer choices. So maybe you'll replace it with something like because the latter was feeling unwell, or because Elizabeth was feeling unwell. Right, something like that. Or you could say, let's try to visit Elizabeth who was feeling unwell, something like that. Right, so you actually have to say, clear that ambiguity one way or the other. Let me give you another example. How about that? I love shopping at Walmart because they have good prices. Let me know if all of the pronouns here are used properly. Why yes or why not? What do you think? That used properly? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Many people are saying yes. I mean, think about this. You're going to tell your friend or your roommate or your significant other, you say, look, I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to go to Walmart. They have a sale today. You want anything? Right? That's how we speak. Or they have good prices, right? But let me ask you this question. The pronoun, it refers to what? It's referring to Walmart. Just for the record, Walmart is the name of a company. And it's one Walmart. So we should actually say, I love shopping at Walmart because it has good prices. I mean, who says this, right? That's why the GMAT sometimes will give you things such as, you know, Google just developed a new phone because they're such a great and innovative company. I mean, who is they? Google? I mean, Google is it, but that's not how we speak. Let me give you one more. This GMAT class is if you and I or you and me. What do you think? What should we actually say? You know, I've heard many different things. If you listen to some songs, then you know, I believe it's Lady Gaga who's singing "You and I." You know, which one's true? Which one's correct? You and I. Some people are saying you and I. Some people are saying you and me. Okay, let me ask you this question: which one's correct in this sentence? Is it you and I, you and me? Because I'm going to give you a very MBA style answer. It depends. Both could be correct. Yeah. Yeah. So let's think about this. Now, most of the people are saying you and I. So here's the thing. Very often we're going to have some patterns of our language, and very often we're going to speak a certain way just because we speak that way always. There is a rule behind that sentence, and the rule is the rule of the difference between the subjective and objective pronouns. What's the difference between I and me? Now, there is no difference between you and you. So that's not where I want to place my focus. I want to place my focus on I and me. In fact, what I might even do is just get rid of you and. Let's just focus on I and me, because you and are the same. So this GMAT class is for I, or this GMAT class is for me. Which one do you think is correct? I think it's pretty obvious that the answer is actually you and me. By focusing on what's different, not what's the same. Again, most of us have been trained to focus on what's the same. So sometimes we have to retrain our brain to focus on what's different. If you come to our GMAT mastery class, we're actually going to teach you, and we'll do a series of exercises, how you can specifically force yourself to focus on the differences and use that to your advantage. And some people are still saying you and I. Well, okay, let me give you another reason why it's you and me. If you're not convinced yet by getting rid of you and, another reason is I is a subjective pronoun. I am studying for the test. Me is an objective pronoun. The pizza was given to me. So the question is you and I, you and me, a subject or an object? Well, I have the GMAT class is, so the GMAT class is a subject, is a verb, for is a preposition, what follows the for is an object, so I need to use you and me. Yeah. Somebody was saying, is you and I proper managed? No. If it's a subject, it is. If it's an object, then it's you and me. Yeah, that's grammar. Anyway, now you know why. And you also know how to fix it. Either focus on what's different, or remember the subject and the subjective and objective pronouns, or do both. Which leads us to also number 2. Who or whom is this class for? That's a good question. What do you think? Is it who is this class for, or is it whom is this class for? Who? Yeah, most of the people are saying who. Some people are saying whom. I mean, let me ask you this question, ladies and gentlemen. Please raise your hand if you can honestly say that you always properly use who versus whom every day, always. I am not going to raise my hand. That's definitely not the case, ladies and gentlemen. But I do know the rule, and I've been teaching the GMAT for 14 years. Obviously, on the GMAT, I will know 90% of the time. Okay, that's good. So here's the difference between who and whom. Who is a subject, whom is an object. So you might ask yourself a question. Am I dealing here with a subject or an object? And if you realize that this class is for someone, you also realize that this class is a subject, is a verb, so who or whom is an object, therefore we should use whom. But I'm going to give you another test. You don't really want to think too much about the grammar. It's about developing the right habits, and it's about developing shortcuts. So let me give you a shortcut. All you have to do is just answer this question. If you ever faced with 2 answer choices, where one is saying who, one is saying whom, simply answer with they or them. If the answer is they, you should use who. If the answer is them, you should use whom. So what's the answer to this question? This class is for them. Therefore, should use whom. Yeah. Whew, sounds like fun. Hope you learned some new things. If anybody got all of the sentences correct, congratulations. Let me know in the chat if you got all 5 correct. But what I'd like to do is actually test how well we've learned something. I'd like to give you a sentence. And I'll give you 1.5 minutes. That's what you're going to have on average for a sentence correction question. And I'm simply going to ask you to share what you think is the answer. So there you go. So 1.5 minutes. Now, by the way, in case you've never seen the sentence correction question, It's basically one sentence where a part of the sentence, or sometimes the whole sentence, sometimes as little as one word is underlined. And then versions A, B, C, D, and E give you 5 different options for the underlined part. Option A is always the same as the original sentence. It could be correct, in which case you'll choose A, maybe not, in which case you'll choose B, C, D, and E. Your job is to pick the answer choice that fits the original sentence and follows all of the grammar rules, conveys the meaning properly, and uses the proper style. There you go. Hopefully that helps. Now I'm going to give you a minute and a half. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so that's been about a minute and a half. Let me actually share with you what most people have chosen. And what I'd like to ask you to do is actually, as I'm wrapping this up and sharing this with you, as you could see, most people have gone for C, and slightly fewer people for A, almost nobody for D, and B, and more people for E. So if you've chosen, let's say C, which is what the majority of the people voted for, please let me know, why did you choose C? What was the reason why you chose C? Just let me know in the chat box. I'll give you 10 seconds. Please let me know. Okay, so some people are saying, look, I fitted the original sentence, fitted the original sentence best. I like that there's a list of 3 things. I like the list of 3 things. Yes, so most people say I like the list of 3 things. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you this question first. We want to be efficient with our time, and I certainly haven't given you a lot of time. I've only given you a minute and a half for this question, which is, by the way, what you on average going to spend on sentence correction question. But I want to try to be efficient. So as I read the sentence, I'm going to probably have to make some decisions. One of the decisions I'm going to have to make is probably whether I should use sloth or the sloth. I mean, look at the answer choices. A, B, and C say sloth, and D and E use the sloth. So what do you think? Should we use sloth or should we use the sloth? And how are we going to decide? I mean, one of the ways to decide it is to probably just say, look, I mean, logically, there's probably more than one sloth in South America. So should I just say sloth by default? Maybe not, right? Because they could also refer to a species. Some people are saying it's better grammar. Sloth is better grammar, just makes a little more sense. And I'd like to focus on the rule. So yeah, maybe better, maybe like it's a preference. We'll talk about preferences in later on, but let's focus on some harder rules. So the rules that we've learned so far were, number one, the rule of a subject-verb agreement. So the subject must agree with the verb, and obviously SWAs are plural and the SWAs is singular. So if you look at the verbs, hopefully if there's a mismatch, then we can eliminate that answer choice. And if you look at A, B, C, D, and E, interestingly enough, A, B, and C all use plural, both in the subject and the verb. SWAs hang, SWAs hang, SWAs use. And D and E use singular. The SWAs hangs and the SWAs hangs. So that's not what I can use. But some here is saying, well, wait a second. We've also learned another agreement rule today, and that was the pronoun agreement. So if you really think about this, most people are approaching this sentence by just simply saying, look, I'm going to just go by what sounds right, or what looks right, or feels right. But we want to be very strategic, and we want to be quite focused on what's going to help us. So we know the difference between plural and singular could be tested either with a subject-verb agreement or with a pronoun agreement. So subject-verb agreement isn't the one because all of the verbs are proper. What about the pronoun? Was there a pronoun, ladies and gentlemen? Interestingly enough, it was. It was there twice. And most people don't read past the underlined part. They just say, well, it's not that important, right? The underlined part is the only one that's going to change. So that's a big mistake. If you read till the end, you'll notice its coat and its toes. Guess what? I don't even have to keep reading A, B, and C. I already know A, B, and C are wrong. Because its cannot refer to sloths. It has to refer to the sloth. Okay, so now I'm down to two answer choices, D and E. Most people chose E. The answer is actually D. Interesting. It was one of the least popular answers. So if you look at C, why most people chose C, they said there's three things: sloth use, hang, sleep, and move. Or they use limbs to hang, sleep, and move. Right? And if it wasn't for the pronoun disagreement, then maybe C could have been the right answer. Because we have a list of these three things: hang, sleep, and move. And we also have the list of three things in E. So it hangs, sleeps, and moves. So it seems like E should be correct. But there's a problem. With E, the list says the source hangs, sleeps, and it moves. That's not the same as hangs, sleeps, and moves. So if you've learned a bit of English grammar that's tested on the GMAT, you may have heard of the rule of parallel structure, the rule of a list. So in the list, when you're listing three things, you want to make sure you list in the same three things. We said Amy and Bobby. We didn't say Amy and her car. That makes no sense, right? So hangs, sleeps, and it moves. That's not proper grammar. D is a proper grammar, even though you might be saying, well, wait a second, hangs, sleeping, and moving? Yeah, because sleeping and moving now become participles. Remember we talked about he is sleeping? So is sleeping is a verb, but sleeping itself is a participle. It's a descriptor to how the sloth hangs. Do we really need to understand what the sloth is doing? Well, if we try to understand whether the sloth hangs by sleeping or hangs and sleeps, we'll probably be here till tomorrow. But we need to focus on the rules and the structure. And most importantly, we need to remember, ladies and gentlemen, not to choose what sounds right, looks right, or feels right. We need to make sure that we develop this attention to detail. We know the rules. We focus on the clarity of communication. The meaning has to make sense. And ultimately, this is a process that can help you save a lot of time on the test. I remember I had a student several years ago. He struggled with reading comprehension because he was just a slow reader. And even though we taught him an efficient way to read, it was still taking him some time. So guess what? Instead of trying to continue working on his reading comprehension and try to teach him how to read faster, he had quite limited time. We focused more on his speed of sentence correction. And as a result, we were able to help him really master this process. And he did very well in reading comprehension as a result because he gained some time. Make sense? Sounds easy? Yeah, I wish the GMAT were this easy, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, I wish it were. By the way, what do you think about this sentence? Good sentence, bad sentence, talking about grammar. What do you think? Is that a good sentence? Or is there anything wrong with this sentence? Yeah, some of the people are saying it's wrong. There should be was. Yeah. Does anybody think it's an okay sentence? Yeah, some of the people saying, yeah, that's correct. It's conditional, or you're talking about something you wish. Yeah, I mean, have you ever said, I wish I were you, or if I were you, I wouldn't do that, right? Why did we say, I wish I were you, not I wish I was you? Because of something that's called the condition as conditional, something that's hypothetical, not true. That's what's called the subjunctive mood on the GMAT. So anyway, we're not going to go too deep into, into the GMAT grammar right now. We will be teaching this to you if you come to our class, but this sentence is correct. Yes, there's nothing wrong with this sentence whatsoever. Whew. Sounds like fun, right? Ladies and gentlemen, well, let me give you a little bit of a preview of what you're up against on the GMAT. As you could see, I hope you can see this right now, that the GMAT isn't some sort of a rocket science exam where you have to learn a lot of different, very complicated things, but it's a test that's going to continuously challenge you. And as a result, people don't like to be challenged for the most part. But if you want to go into business school, and if you want to solve challenges, then you obviously need to know how to handle challenges yourself. So be prepared for this challenge. There are about 10 million people a year who are thinking of doing an MBA or a master's degree. Of these 10 million people, that's statistics from MBA.com. About 2 million people will start preparing for the GMAT. They'll either buy a GMAT book, or they'll download the practice test, or they'll actually create a profile and expose themselves more to the GMAT. And of these people, just slightly over 5% will actually do the GMAT. And of them, only about 13% of people will get a score of 700 or more. So if you think about this, of everybody who thinks, well, it would be nice to do a GMAT because I want to do an MBA or I want to do a master's, only about 1 in 500, 1 in 600 people will end up with a score of 700 or more. And on a new version of the test, it will be like 1 in 5,000. So you got to stay really committed to this process. But hopefully you're having fun. By the way, anybody having fun, let me know in the chat box, please. It's important to have fun, because that's something new to learn, right? Sometimes we have people come into a class. I remember we had a gentleman. He said, well, I don't even know if I'm going to do my MBA yet, but I know that I want to learn some new skills. Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you. Angelica said, learn a lot. So here's just a little example. So we had Natasha. She came from Brazil. English is her third language. It was a number of years ago. And she said, look, I want to get a good score. She was an engineer. She was struggling with verbal. And I wanted to share her comments here, because Natasha ended up with a score of top 4%. She basically beat 96% of people on the verbal section by being a non-native speaker, because she learned the structure of the language. That's really it. So it's not so much about understanding the language very deeply. It's not so much about becoming a PhD in English. In fact, we had a PhD in English who recently took our practice test and scored terribly on verbal. I'm like, dude, you have a PhD in English. Is the GMAT available in French? No, unfortunately not. It is an English-only test. So if you are applying to French schools only, you might be able to take an exam called TAJMASH, which is somewhat like a clone of the GMAT, basically. So it's going to take some practice. And I'm going to share with you some of the things of, by the way, we will be very briefly covering critical reasoning and reading comprehension as well. And then I'm going to share with you how to practice and how to study as well. But I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be an exam that requires a lot of practice. And practicing with questions from past exams is a great idea. For example, if you come to our class, we will be using, for the most part, questions from the past exams that will be providing a workbook for our class. We also currently provide the GMAT official guide in our class, so it's really important that you get exposed to questions from past exams. In addition to that, if you need more questions, if you come to our class, we are going to give you access to a platform with over 5,000 questions. The questions that are very similar to questions from past exams, and you're going to have a lot of them. There aren't enough official questions to practice. There's somewhat of a limited number. You're going to have about 1,500 as part of our course. But if you want to get access to additional practice resources as part of our course, you will have access to this GMAT Express platform. But if you've already been studying a lot, or maybe you are on a strict budget, or maybe you have a tutor who is helping you privately, then getting access to this GMAT Express platform by itself is going to be very helpful. The GMAT Focus study books. Yes, so the current GMAT books are relevant to the GMAT Focus. The GMAT Focus books are not relevant to the older version. So that's why currently we still will provide the GMAT Official Guide 2022. But if you want to take the GMAT Focus, again, you can still use those books, right? So they're kind of forward compatible, but not backwards compatible. You'll just have to take mock exams in the new version. So again, if you would like to study by yourself, or if you need just some additional practice with lots of mock exams and additional practice, then there's this option, GMAT Express. You can try it for free for 7 days. You can just get access to this platform. Just go to admitmaster.com/offer, and you can take a mock exam. You can do about 50 questions just to see what that interactive interface looks like. There's some videos to watch. Pretty much everything we teach in our live class is also on this platform. It's just it's not so interactive in a way that you don't have a human behind it, but it still teaches you the same things. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about critical reasoning. I'm going to give you some tips on critical reasoning. We've already done a question today, so I'm going to give you some tips, kind of coming back to what you saw before about Sasha and Jamal. We'll talk a little bit about reading comprehension. I'll give you a structure for your studying. I promise there's going to be a lot today. And then we're going to give you about 20 minutes to Nicoletta from Toronto Metropolitan University, who just joined us. So thanks so much for joining, Nicoletta. She's going to share with you some MBA application tips. Ladies and gentlemen, as much as I love the GMAT, and I chose this to be my career, my retirement career, I've had a corporate career, I had an MBA. This is not the only criteria for the application, right? So you still have to care about other parts of the application. So let me give you some tips for critical reasoning and reading comprehension. Critical reasoning, for the most part, it's about arguments. So what's an argument? Have you ever seen people argue? I'm sure you have. We've seen Jamal and Sasha argue today, right? So most of the arguments, though, in the GMAT are going to be arguments of one person. I don't know if you've ever tried to argue with yourself. It is a lot of fun. You should try it sometimes. But an argument of one person essentially has two parts. It has a conclusion, which is the main idea, main point. For example, my conclusion is I'll get a high score on the GMAT. But if I simply say, look, I'll get a high score on the GMAT, you may or may not believe me because I didn't give you a reason why I believe that. So if I give you a reason, that becomes an argument. Make sense? So that's the basic structure. So why do I believe I'm going to get a high score? Because I take my preparation seriously. I make the right decisions. I'm going to have the right resources, get the right support, the right structure, the right coaching. Therefore, I'll get a high score. Okay, now I believe you. Right? So that's the difference. There's a claim. I need the evidence to this claim. So whenever you're dealing with critical reasoning questions, that's what primarily you're going to be focusing on. And then there's usually something in the middle, which is the assumption. So that's the basic structure of the argument. Of course, there are different types of questions. There are different ways to deal with them. But again, as you now beginning to get exposed to critical reasoning, keep that in mind, is that the majority of the questions, there are very few exceptions, but the majority of the questions will have this claim or evidence. Your ability to recognize what's an evidence and what's a conclusion, what's the claim, what's an opinion, what's a fact, is going to determine to a large part whether you're going to be successful in critical reasoning. And remember, critical reasoning going forward is going to become a larger part of the GMAT verbal, because sentence correction is going to be removed from the new GMAT Focus. Now, I left the best for the last, of course, reading comprehension. I'm sure you're all very excited after being here for almost an hour and a half to learn something about reading comprehension, right? Now, that could happen, by the way, on a real test. If you're doing your verbal section last, imagine you've been there for a couple of hours and all of a sudden you see a passage about the mating habits of snails. Super exciting, some biology there for you. So let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, reading comprehension is really boring and most people hate it. So let me teach you how you can at least hate it less. Here's a very good strategy. The strategy is stop focusing on what the author is saying. It's not that important. Start focusing on how the author is saying it. The structure of the passage is a lot more important than the content of the passage. Remember, the GMAT is not a content-based exam. It doesn't test how well you know biology. It tests how well you can read unfamiliar text and pull out the structure. Remember when we talked about Jamal and Sasha who were arguing? It wasn't about what exactly they're arguing. We didn't need to understand, what does it mean being physically active? But we did need to understand that Jamal was qualifying her conclusion. So understanding the narrative, understanding the structure of the passage is a lot more important than understanding the content. This sounds a lot harder than it actually is. But for many people, it is actually quite hard to switch your brain to reading for the content and not for the structure. So I'd like to encourage you, ladies and gentlemen, to start reading for the structure. When you read a passage, I'd like you to focus on slightly different things than what we normally focus on. We normally focus on trying to pull out some new things to learn. And for example, if you have some sort of a technical term or some jargon, we usually focus on that jargon. So instead, let's try to focus on how the passage is organized. Maybe ask yourself a question. What's the purpose of each paragraph? By the way, you don't have to write this down. I'll send you a follow-up email tomorrow. I'll include this in that email. And by the way, I'll include the recording of this class as well. So what's the purpose? Why is it there? Why did the author use it? Why did the author talk about something that doesn't work anymore? Maybe because the author wants to tell us something that does work now. Maybe some sort of a new concept. So that's important. Keep an eye on the structure and how things are related as you are reading the passage. The same thing we did in critical reasoning. What's my opinion? What's my point? And how are the rest of the statements related to it? They're supporting by providing some piece of evidence. In a longer paragraph, you're going to see more different structures, more ways to relate, but still things have to relate to each other. They don't just throw in random ideas at us. So take note of a structure as you read and then ask yourself a few more questions. What was the passage about? Why did the author write this? And what does the author think about all of this? Maybe it was about, let's say, maybe it was about the black hole. Today we were doing a passage in a tutoring session with one of my students about the black hole in the middle of the Milky Way. So it was about understanding whether there is or there is not a black hole in the middle of the Milky Way. And the author was fairly neutral, was trying to debate. And the purpose was to actually explain that we don't know yet. Explain to us why we still don't understand whether there is a black hole. That was the purpose, right? How exactly they've done that and what kind of, I think they've used like something related to mass and something related to spectra of illumination. Honestly, I don't even remember that, but I do remember the structure of the passage, and that helps me answer the questions. So that's how we have to train ourselves to read a little bit differently. Whew. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me spend about 5 minutes talking about how we actually going to structure our studies. Then we'll get to talk about the MBA application. So what resources can we use? Well, that's a really good question. And the honest answer is there's so many different resources. So how can you understand which resources are right for you? Here's what I would suggest. Here's what I did. I did my test 20 years ago. And at that time, there weren't too many resources. Some business schools didn't even have a website. And I said, okay, let me take a practice test. The score is 200 to 800. Let me see where I stand. A really good idea. I'm going to send you a link, and I'll show you a link in a few moments of how you can take a practice test. We do this practice test in partnership with Ted Rogers School of Management. So you'll be able to get your results right away. And by the way, the school is not going to see your results, just in case you're wondering. But you will, and I will as well. So I can give you some suggestions if you'd like. So when I took the first practice test, I got a score, and my score was 650. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty good score. But most importantly, I was able to analyze what went wrong and why didn't I get a higher score. For me, it was knowing some terminology. For you, it might be completely different. So I took some time to learn the terminology. I learned math in a different language. I didn't know what's an isosceles triangle when I took my first practice test, but it was a good reality check for me. And then a week later, I learned these terms. It wasn't too hard. I took my next practice test. I scored 700, booked my real test. It was really easy at that time. In 2 weeks from the time I started to study, I got a score of 750. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're wondering, is this all real? Yes, absolutely. That's my score report. It's all real, all legit. I'm showing this not to impress you. It honestly impresses me. I mean, that's pretty much the only time when I can boast about my score. So if you get a good score, you can also tell people you got a good score. But in case you're wondering, well, I guess Sergey is some sort of a genius. I can never do that. Let me bust a myth. I'm not a genius. In fact, I'm not smarter than any other people. Is the reason why I did so well on the GMAT, and the reason why I know the GMAT so well is I've been doing this for a long time. Right? It's kind of like if I want somebody to build my house, I'm not going to try to build it myself. I'm going to probably hire somebody experienced because they know what they're doing. The same thing with the GMAT. I know it better just because I've been doing it for so long. And for me, initially, how I got into this, it actually took me many, many years in my middle school and my high school to learn these strategies. And when I needed to do my GMAT, I kind of pretty much already knew how to do most of the things. I knew the units digit strategy. I knew a lot of things about the process elimination. I participated in the math Olympiads. I had a really good teacher in my middle school and my high school who taught me basically how to think differently. And now the work I'm doing, I eventually became a GMAT instructor. That's actually my idea of retirement, ladies and gentlemen. I did my MBA 20 years ago. I worked in a corporation for 10 years. I started teaching the GMAT 14 years ago, part-time. And for the past about 10 years, 9 years, I've been teaching it full-time. So I'm retired. And, I'm not seeing myself doing any other career, but I love it because I meet so many great people like yourself. Very often I would meet you in person. So I actually will tell you just in a moment how we can meet in person, but I want to give you the structure of studying for the test. And the structure is very important. Let me give you an example. Here's Dylan came to us at the start of the pandemic, and he said, look, I'm so busy. He worked for a consulting firm. He said, we're dealing with a lot of the fallouts of the pandemic and the distribution chains and all of these things. He said, look, but I still want to do my MBA. I need a structure. It's very important for me. So many people, when they're thinking about the way to study for the GMAT, one of the first things that comes to their mind is I need a structure. And then once they have the structure, they think about what resources will I use. And here, for example, for Dylan, when he came in, he said, look, I work 60-hour work weeks. I don't have time to fool around. I need to know exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And I'm not going to go and look for resources because I know there are billions of resources online. So he wrote a comment here. He got a score of 740. It took him about 4 months, working 60-hour work weeks, started from about 500s. And he did this following the structure. So let me show you the structure. If you come to our class, that's what we're going to follow. If you can't come to our class, I would suggest you follow the same structure. The structure is based on the understanding that this is a psychometric test that hopefully is going to be unfrozen in just a moment. Okay, can you hear me now? Because I believe my video was frozen for just a second. Let me know if you can hear me. Can you guys hear me? Yes, okay, perfect. All right, so remember, this is the skill. So how do we master a skill? Well, very simply. Let's just refer back to that analogy of driving a car. How did we learn how to drive a car? Do you really think about driving a car in the morning? You just say, no, just get into a car and drive, right? If I ask you how many steps do you take when you drive a car, you'll say one. You get in the car and drive. But this is not where you started, because now you're skilled. when you started, first of all, you had to learn some rules. And you had to learn some maybe signs, some road signs. Green means go and red means stop and other things. And it was the first step. And that's a very important step. That's why when you're studying for the GMAT, this should also be the first step. You learn the theory first. So sometimes people say, well, I'd like to study a bit on my own before I come to the class. Absolutely. In fact, that's what we can ask you to do. I noticed some of you have already signed up for a class in August and September. Well, guess what? There's about a week before the August class. There's about a month, 5 weeks before the September class. So you already have access to our resources where essentially we're going to give you a bunch of exercises. We want to make sure you're staying focused. Your time's valuable. So we're going to give you the exercises to do specifically designed to help you remember what you learned in your middle school and high school. And you can usually cover them in about 2 to 4 weeks. Now, if you've done really well in school, you might be able to do it even faster. So that's step number 1. So it's not just about reading a high school textbook, it's about applying, right? That's why we give you the exercises and they are adaptive. So you can focus more on the areas where you need more help. So that's step number 1. So make sure you know the theory, you know the area of a trapezoid, but not just that, but do some questions, some basic questions about circles, trapezoids, things like that, so that you can actually apply the formulas, not just know them intellectually. So that's step 1. Step 2. Simply knowing the rules isn't enough to drive a car, right? If you remember, we don't yet have a skill. And if you remember, the first time you got into a car, let me ask you this question. How comfortable or how confident were you driving a car the first time you were in a car? I remember my first time, I certainly wasn't comfortable. But now, or over time, you build that comfort. The same thing is going to happen with the GMAT. At first, you'll feel like you are reading a foreign language. And at first, let me ask you this question. What's the chance that if you're trying to do something you've never done before, you're going to make mistakes? Yeah, some people are saying 100%. Absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly, 100%. We're all going to make mistakes if we haven't done something before. So it's important to recognize this, that you will be making mistakes. And it's important to be kind to yourself, but it's also important to understand that if you want to reduce your mistake, it's better for you to learn the best strategies, the strategies that work upfront. Because what a lot of people do is they just do a bunch of questions, they try to figure out how to do them as they go, but they make so many mistakes that by the time that they get to the next topic, they're already so exhausted. So it's important to learn what works first and then practice and recognize you will be making mistakes. So having somebody who is there giving you some feedback. I was doing a tutoring session today with a student. She knows all the rules, but we did a passage with her, and I noticed some very subtle things, the way that she does them. Right? She was practicing for a few months, but she wasn't seeing that. And now she knows what to work on. So that's important. And when you come to a live class, that's the difference between a live class and self-study, is that especially in our class, which is about 10, 15 people, very interactive, whether you're in person or online, you'll be able to get that feedback. So that's important to recognize. And number 3, it's also important to recognize that practice doesn't make perfect. Some of the people saying, oh, practice makes perfect, I'm going to practice a lot. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not true. I mean, look, if you practice something that doesn't work, are we going to become perfect? Right? So it's important to recognize that practice makes a habit. The more you practice something, the more this is going to become a habit. If we practice something that doesn't work, we're going to develop a lot of bad habits. If we practice something that does work, we're going to develop a lot of good habits. So the 3 steps are, number 1, learn the theory. That's important. You're going to know the rules of the game. Number 2, start playing the game, but recognize you have a lot to learn, probably, depending on your practice test results. And you probably are going to make a lot of mistakes. So it's important to work on them and recognize and maybe get some feedback. And finally, it's important to practice. But before you practice, there's these first 2 steps. We have to know the rules and we have to learn what works, and only then practice, right? If I want to learn how to play a new sport, a few years ago, I learned how to sail a boat. If I were to practice before learning the theory and before learning the strategies, what's going to happen? I would crash the boat. That's it. And I'll never do it again. It's a pretty complicated sport, by the way, but I enjoy it because now I've been doing this for so many years. So now I developed the habit. To me, it's easy. I take somebody on a boat with me. Sometimes I take my wife on a boat with me. She's freaking out because she doesn't know what to do, but I do. So I'm comfortable. I'm confident. doesn't matter where the wind blows, we can go where we need to go, right? So that's important. Three steps. I use the same steps when I learned how to sail a boat. Ladies and gentlemen, whatever skill you want to learn the rules first and get some coaching, learn some strategies, recognize there's things to learn. And it's not just the rules, it's the actual process. And finally, make sure you practice a lot. And if you do that, you will be getting good results. And the more you practice, as long as you learn the good strategies, you will get better and better results. About a third of our students get scores above 700. You know, if you go online and read some forums, and I remember there was this one company that claims that 92% of their students get scores above 700. Statistics just doesn't work. It is a hard test, but I can promise to you is that if you put your mind and heart to it, you can do really well. We have people sometimes come into us with a diagnostic score of 200, they end up with scores above 700. So it's all possible. So where do we go from here? If you would like to come and join us in our live class, it's very simple. We have evening and weekend classes. We make this class slightly more affordable than some of the competing courses from companies such as Manhattan Prep and Princeton Review, but we include a lot more in the course. Most importantly, we include free course retakes and we include ongoing coaching. So you can come back to the class anytime for 1 year. We're going to give you a chance to watch the videos. We'll give you all of the mock exams, all of the books, and most importantly, we'll be supporting you. There's a very supportive community. All of our instructors are on WhatsApp groups, so you'll be part of a WhatsApp group where you can always ask questions. You'll be part of a Facebook group, which is there are a few hundred people who are all across our different classes that are going to be supporting you as well. It is important to have that support network. And that's going to help you get the results. So how long is it going to take you to get the results? Well, it depends. We give you about a year to go through our program. And I'll show you the price in a moment. So Fionn, for example, took about 9 months. She was a nurse in the emergency room during the pandemic. And yet she was still able to get a score of 760, took her about 9 months. She was able to study 4 or 5 hours a week. Very little, but she was very committed. Here's Brian. He actually was studying full time. And in 6 weeks, he got a score of 760 from 570. So if you're super committed, you have the right structure, you could do that. There are many other options as well. If you go on our website, you're going to see the range from literally from just less than $100 to our live course, which is again compared to some of the other live courses with the amount of hours that you have in class and all of the support, you will realize it's actually a lot more affordable than it looks. I remember we had a student several years ago. She was, trying to negotiate, and we said, look, we have early bird discounts. We don't really negotiate. We're going to fair to everyone. And then she stood up at the end of the class. She said, look, I honestly don't understand how this class could be so cheap. You give so much with this class. So again, it depends on where you want to be, how much of the improvement you need. You can try a few things out. You can go to admitmaster.com/offer. If you like to study with us live, I will be one of your instructors. And if you want to meet in person, by the way, come and join us at the GMAT MBA tours. There will be tours. We're going to be in, so we've been in New York. We will be in Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. So come and join us. Come and see us at all of these events. I will send you a link. Please register using that link, and I will see you there. Hopefully, we'll see you in person. So, ladies and gentlemen, the important question now is for you is, what's next for you? There's obviously also an application, which Nicoletta is going to talk about right now for the next 15, 20 minutes. Yeah, so Access MBA will be at Access MBA, will be at the QS MBA, and as well as the GMAT. So ladies and gentlemen, think about what's next for you. What I realized is sometimes, you get very excited about taking your career to the next level. And I'm sure that after Nicoletta talks, you'll be even more excited about what's coming your way in the MBA program. But what's the next step? And make sure you commit to some sort of a next step. Maybe sign up to a Master Refresher, or maybe take that practice test. So if you're the kind of person who just wants the best for yourself and that you're very eager to take your career to the next level, I mean, honestly, we had a client recently who decided to go to an MBA program that's going to cost him about $300,000. And one of the things I love about Ted Rogers' program is it's actually very affordable, right? So, and you guys are going to talk about this, and he had a chance to get a scholarship from one of the other schools, and he said, "Look, I'm just going to go and pay $300,000 for a program." I said, "Oh, are you crazy? So much money?" He said, "Look, honestly, 20 years from now, it's not going to matter." So think about this as a bigger picture. Where do you want to take your career? and how important is it for you? And if you want to chat one-on-one, I'm happy to. Just send me your resume, and we'll pick the time. I'm going to be away for the one weekend. I'll be back on Tuesday for our class. But if you want to chat tomorrow, or if you want to chat after Tuesday, just send me an email. I'll be available anyway by WhatsApp, by text message. I'll send you my contact details tomorrow. I'll put them in the chat box as well. And ladies and gentlemen, also let me know what's the next step for you. You know, sometimes having a little bit of that commitment for yourself. And if you tell me you want to chat, I'll get back to you, and we can chat one-on-one. Then I know that you are the kind of person who wants to get a good score, and who's taking this seriously. So let me know. I'll reach out to you, and we'll have a bit of a discussion. You'll send me your resume, and we'll talk about what's right for you. I'm not there to sell you a course. I'm there to help you and figure out what's the best next thing for you. If our course is going to help you, that's great. You know, I believe we have one of the best courses in the world. I've been doing this for a long time. Our company has been around since 1998. So I know that this course is going to help if you want to get a good score. So again, let me know if you want to chat. But with this, ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking a lot, really fast. Hopefully you found this valuable. I want you to stick around for the next 15-20 minutes, because Nicoletta, are you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, Sergey. Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hi. So Nicoletta is from the Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University. She's a manager of graduate recruitment. And I've asked her to come here to actually share what's really going on behind the scenes when the schools make decisions. What are they really looking for? And share some of the tips. I know you can read things on the website, but I've asked her to share with you primarily what you won't read on the website. So here you go, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Nicoletta. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours. And absolutely. I'm also going to type here my contact information, where you can find more details about what we talked about, as well as the trials. And I'll stick around for any questions, ladies and gentlemen. I will be here for as long as it's necessary.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me today, Sergey. And hello, everyone. To introduce myself, my name is Nicoletta Papadopoulos, and I work as a manager of graduate student recruitment at Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University. I've been working there since May 2019. Within the post-secondary sector, I've been working for about 10 years. Previous to Toronto Metropolitan University, I worked at Sheridan College, the University of Toronto. I also completed a Master of Education in 2013 from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and am heavily involved with my alumni association. And in terms of the session overview, I'm going to provide some high-level information, and we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for any questions. But really what we're going to be focusing on is picking the right program for you. So taking things into consideration such as study options, program delivery, curriculum and courses, admission tips. So we'll go over the different requirements and what are some things that admissions committee take into consideration when reviewing different pieces of your application. Funding your studies, so scholarships and awards and different opportunities to be able to fund your studies. I'll also go over the Ted Rogers MBA programs, fees and application deadlines, and we'll end with the Q&A. So to start things off, picking the right program for you. One of the main kind of questions you may want to ask yourself is, how does the program fit with your personal and professional commitments? So the examples I'll use here are the different program deliveries that Ted Rogers offers. So for example, we have our accelerated full-time MBA program that can be completed within 12 to 16 months. Someone taking the program on a full-time basis probably isn't going to be working full-time, and they're likely going to be wanting to really focus in specifically on their program. Now, we also have a flex full-time offering for working professionals who have a flexible schedule, but can also take time some more studies, and that's typically 3 course credits per semester. And then we also have the part-time MBA, which is 2 course credits per semester, which is best suited for working professionals. So when you're reviewing different MBA programs, it's great for you to be able to review the course scheduling and study options that are available to know what's going to be right for you. Be clear on the format you're looking to study in. So is the program in person or is it online? Are you looking for an in-person program are you looking for online? I can tell you that the Ted Rogers MBA program is in person. We're at the heart of downtown Toronto. So it can be really nice for anybody who's, in the city core looking for that type of opportunity. And then it's also important to have those conversations with not only your employer, but your personal network. The MBA is a big undertaking. So you want to make sure everyone within your network is there to support you and provide you with the encouragement you need to pursue it. Now, another point that comes to mind are what are the specific subjects or experiences you want to take part in? So some of the themes, for example, that the Ted Rogers MBA program has is leading for performance and well-being, driven by technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, and diversity. We also have an MBA with a sport business focus and an MA media production MBA pathway. So different programs that you're going to be reviewing are going to have different areas of focus that maybe they're known better for or different experiences. So it's great for you to review the curriculum, themes, and courses to see which programs align best with your career goals or interests. Understand the experiences that are available to you as part of the program and outside the classroom. Do you want to get involved in case competitions, student groups? Are there other experiential opportunities you're looking to take part in? So that's important to understand as you're going through these different programs. And also getting a sense of the culture and values of the program and institution can be very helpful as well. And what I also recommend to people is feel free to reach out to alumni or current students to get a sense of what their experiences are. Now we're going to get into admission tips. So programs may vary depending on the school, but a lot of them will have similar requirements to these. These are the requirements that we have for the Ted Rogers MBA program. So typically it's a 4-year bachelor degree, minimum B GPA in the last 2 years of study, GMAT or GRE. They may have a posted minimum score, they may not. 2 references, which can be a mix of academic, professional, resume, minimum 2 years work experience requirement, statement of interest, English proficiency test if required. We have an online interview. Other programs may have them in person. Now, starting off with the undergraduate degree and GPA requirement, one thing I want to note is MBA programs do accept applicants from diverse undergraduate education programs. One thing I get a lot of questions from people from non-business undergraduate programs is, am I okay to apply to an MBA program? And it is very common for people, not only those who come from a BCom or BBA degree, to pursue an MBA program. So that's something, definitely don't self-select yourself out if you don't have a business undergrad. There's definitely space for you in an MBA program. It's really important also to review the program website on minimum GPA requirements and the average GPA of the class demographic if they have it posted, to get a sense of what the profile is of people who are admitted into the program. It's also really important throughout that process to have a conversation with an admissions staff person if you are unsure about the degree program and GPA requirements for the program, and if there's an alignment there. You don't want to ever think like, oh, just based on what I've seen on the website, I probably won't get into this program. It's so important to have those conversations. Next are the references. So you'll see on the website a mix of maybe academic, professional posted on the program. So for our program, we do accept academic and professional or to professional, but it's important to understand what the school is looking for. From my perspective, I would say a stronger professional reference is someone who you reported to versus a colleague, just because that person was your manager. And so the admissions committee would likely see them as someone stronger to be able to speak to your competencies. And then also be very selective about who you're going to be choosing to be your reference as well. I mean, it's great if you're getting someone who's like the top person at a company, but if they don't really know you or have a great experience with you, they may not be able to provide you with a really strong recommendation. So I'll just go to the next slide here. Next, we'll speak about resumes. So something that's really important with the resume is ensure that you're capturing all of your progressive work experience in your resume and that everything is up to date. Sometimes what I've seen is people submitting a resume that maybe captures only the last few years, thinking like from a job prospect perspective, but the admissions committee is going to be using that document to calculate how many years of work experience you have. And making sure that, you know, your resume is easy to read and follow, focus on your career achievements versus just a list of work tasks. Other suggested areas to highlight, I would say, would be, of course, educational accomplishments. So have you gotten any awards, recognitions, student leadership opportunities? Professional development can be another way to highlight things on your resume, certifications, designations, any associations you're part of. Boards and committee, be it volunteer or paid board or committee involvements, and also any volunteer opportunities such as fundraising, anything you're doing within the community, are there great ways for you to build your profile with your resume. Statement of interest, some points I would say around that. Be sure to stay within the word count and guidelines of the specific program you're applying to. So if the program says, you know, 500 word count, stick within that. Be very focused in what you're trying to say. It's great to highlight your career objective, interests, how they align to the program you're applying to, and also outline how your previous experiences have prepared you for the program. One thing that's very important is to customize each statement of interest you prepare to the school you're applying to. Typically, admissions committees can tell if you've just kind of created one blanket statement that you're using to apply to all business schools. So show that you've done your research about the program. Ways that you can do this is to highlight things about the program that interest you, that align with your interests. So for example, I mentioned earlier that entrepreneurship is one of the focuses of the MBA program. Do you have entrepreneurial interests? That's a great way for you to highlight within your statement of interest why specifically you want to maybe pursue the program at Ted Rogers School. So it's important to make those alignments within your statement of interest so that the school understands that you've actually done your research and know why you want to get into the specific program. Next is, if the program has an online or in-person interview, treat that interview as if the same way you would prepare for like a job interview. So think about like, you know, your environment. If it's an online, is the lighting okay? Are you in a space where, you know, you're not going to be distracted? You know, think about like your attire in terms of, you know, how you would show up in a job interview. Have examples ready to share from your previous work education experiences. Showcase your industry insights and awareness of a program that you're applying to. So, you know, this is a further opportunity for you to really sell yourself and show that, again, you've done your research, you know the program, you know why you want to pursue an MBA program, and bring that all together. And then we have test scores. So it's also important to review the minimum test score requirements posted by the program, such as, do they have a GMAT or GRE minimum score requirement? Do they post minimums for English language tests? I know for our program, if someone doesn't meet those minimums for the language test, that requirement is seen as not being met. So be aware of all these nuances. And if a minimum isn't posted, consult the program on a recommended score range for both admissions and funding considerations. Sometimes certain scholarships are tied to, you know, a high GMAT score. So have that conversation or get a sense of that as you're going through the admissions process. All right, so now we're going to get into funding your studies. So the Ted Rogers MBA program is OSAP eligible. So that's something I did want to mention. And we have different kind of scholarships and awards. Now, schools are going to differ depending, you know, on their kind of like setup of scholarships and awards, but I'll give you just some information about ours. So we have the Ted Rogers School Graduate Entrance Award, which is open to domestic and international applicants. They're up to $20,000 each for full-time, flex full-time, up to $5,000 each for part-time. And for these entrance scholarships, we're looking at GPA, GMAT scores. For the Ted Rogers School Graduate Entrance Award, this one is open to domestic full-time, flex full-time and part-time students. And for this one, we are looking at academic accomplishments, but this one's also needs-based. And so this one's up to $15,000 each for full-time, flex full-time, and up to $5,000 for part-time. We also have a Ted Rogers MBA Black Graduate Leadership Award, which is open to domestic full-time or flex full-time students who self-identify as Black. And we have 3 awards in the amount of $10,000 each, and there's an application for that. We also have our graduate admissions office, Heat School of Graduate Studies, that posts a number of scholarships and awards available to graduate students. Other ways students can fund their studies, it can be through a student line of credit. Sometimes we hear that, professional development support, such as employer supports, lifelong learning, RSP withdrawals, graduate assistantships. So once someone's a student, supporting a class for a professor, students get paid through that. And then we also, there's, Empower Financing, who do student loans as well, and other kind of avenues where people can fund their MBA. So I'll show you our fees and application line deadlines quickly, because I do want to be mindful of time. I can see that there's some things coming through the chat. So I'll look at that at the end. So in terms of our fees, or domestic core tuition for the Ted Rogers MBA program is between $23,551.19 to $25,311.86, and that's the in-province to out-of-province domestic tuition fees, plus some ancillary and program fees. And then our international core tuition is $53,804.40 plus ancillary and program fees. One question we get a lot is why is our MBA program lower than other Toronto-based MBA programs or other programs on the market? Is because we are publicly funded, so our tuition fees are subsidized by the government. In addition, we do have foundation courses, which are on an individual course basis. So these are courses for non-business undergrads, and each course for domestic, it's around $1,963.89 to $2,123.95 per course. And then for international, it's $4,645.46 per course. And typically, graduate tuition fees are paid on a semester by semester basis, and they're based on the number of courses taken per semester. And then these are our application deadlines. So we do have them on our website, so we won't go through every single date, but we do have 2 intakes. So for the spring intake, our portal will be opening September 15th. And for the fall intake, our portal will be opening sometime in mid-October. And then these are the international application deadlines. They are earlier because we do want to provide our international students with more time to submit their documentation, to process their study visa. And we have a spring and fall intake with some information here. And, all of this is on our website if you want to look at the specific dates, and the same portal open dates that I mentioned. So for spring, it'll be September 15th. And then for fall, will be sometime in mid-October that the portal will be opening. So that's it in terms of the information. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found the information I shared helpful. If you have any further questions, you are welcome to email me, but I'll also hang around if there's anything I can answer for you. But thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta, for packing in a lot of the useful information within such a short time. We're just trying to squeeze in as much as we possibly can in these 2 hours. So really appreciate the fast pace. Now we will be sharing Nicoletta's information with everyone tomorrow in that follow-up email. So please connect, and please remember that it is important to connect with the school. This is a very big decision, and it's a decision that kind of goes both ways. You have to make sure that this is the right choice for you, and of course the school has to make sure that you are the right candidate for the school. So make sure you initiate and start that discussion. Now, we have a couple of questions here. One of the questions is, what if my GPA is slightly below the minimum of 3? What if it's, let's say, 2.9? And the minimum is 3. What should we do?
That's a great question. So what I would say is, depending on the program, I think it's best to have a conversation with someone on the recruitment team to talk about your full profile, to say, okay, this is your GPA. What's your work experience? What's this? What's that? You might find certain programs will say, we have a really strict cutoff, and others might be a little more flexible about having that conversation in terms of reviewing your application from a broader perspective. But again, it may vary from program to program. The best thing you can do is to book a meeting with someone from that specific program to see, what insights they can provide.
Yeah, exactly. And many schools would offer things like coffee chats, virtual coffee chats, or in-person coffee chats. So please definitely take advantage. That's a service for you that will help you make the best decision. I would also say that if you're not quite sure about how to structure your resume and what should go in your resume, but at the initial discussion, you don't have to create a perfect MBA resume. I mean, if you already have an MBA resume, that's great. But if you don't, you can just send, is that okay, Nicoletta? Do you agree that for the initial discussion, initial assessment, any resume is okay, just even if it's a job resume?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because, that provides you with that opportunity to get the feedback once, you submit that official document for the admissions committee to review it. I think I saw another question here about, is it okay to include just 10 years of experience versus 20? I mean, what I would typically say is you probably want to capture all of the experience just so that they're able to calculate and make sense of all of your work experience. Now, if you're concerned it's going to be like a lot of pages, find ways where you can maybe summarize it and still capture those years of experience. Because you don't want the admissions committee guessing about certain things, about your work experience, what you were doing at this date to that date. So it's best to just be very clear about the progression of everything that you've done throughout your career.
Perfect. And again, please reach out to Nicoletta. She is going to help you. So the final decision isn't going to be made just by Nicoletta. So, but if you start this discussion, then hopefully she is going to become your advocate in the admissions committee that's going to make a decision, right? Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think it is helpful to just have those kind of conversations with the recruitment professionals, because they are there to guide you, to provide you with advice just based on experiences and kind of perspectives that they can share. Ultimately, of course, like, no one can guarantee you admission prior to getting into the program, but definitely having those conversations early and, consulting with excellent professionals like Sergey and others within that space can really set you up for success.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So there was a question about access to what we shared here at AdmitMaster. So yes, you will have a recording of this entire seminar. We are still recording it. So we will share this recording with you. And if you'd like to view it again, if you'd like to refer to any of the materials that we talked about, or if you'd like to share it with any of your friends, please feel free. Most importantly, if you'd like to chat, then please reach out. We are here. We are your resources. So like I mentioned, this is my idea of retirement, right? So I'm doing this job because I love doing this job. And I love working with very smart people, like, like yourself, like Nicoletta, and, I absolutely love what I do. And I'm sure that Nicoletta does as well. So we are here to help you make the best decisions. So please reach out to us. There were some questions also about the reporting of GMAT scores. Again, if you'd like to chat one-on-one, there are some different procedures for the current versions of the test, online and in person, as well as the new GMAT Focus. I don't want to bore you with exactly how it's going to work, but let's just say that you have control over what gets sent to the schools. But how exactly you have that control, that differs between these three exams, the new exam, the old exam in person, and the old exam online. So if you want to know a little bit more, you can either consult mba.com or reach out to me, and I'll certainly be able to help. If you go on our website, admitmaster.com, you'll be able to book a one-on-one consultation. You can take a practice test if you'd like. Again, the link is trsm.trygmat.com. We are going to send you this link tomorrow. We'll send you a lot of other resources. Please come and join us at the Mass Refresher class 2 weeks from now. Joyce us and join Nicoletta. You're going to be at some of the MBA events as well, right? In Toronto, I believe. Yes,
I'm going to be at the Toronto one happening in August with GMAC.
Perfect. So please come and say hello. It's always helpful to put the name, the face to the name, and again, build that relationship. We are here to help. So if you have any questions, just please reach out. Any final questions before we let you go, ladies and gentlemen? No, I really love it. You are so committed. It's 9:14 p.m. and I know for some of you, it's probably early in the morning. I know some of you are joining us from the other side of the Atlantic. So certainly appreciate very much. I'm very grateful that you have decided to embark on this journey. I mean, let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, our world is fairly complex, and it's getting more and more complex and challenging, unfortunately. And that also means that our world needs good leaders to solve all kinds of problems. So if you feel like you have what it takes to become a leader of tomorrow, then an MBA is a degree that can help you get there a lot faster and also give you the right credentials so that people are going to trust that you know what you're doing. And of course, it gives you a lot of other opportunities. So MBA degree is not for everyone, but if you feel like you have what it takes to be a business leader or a government leader or a not-for-profit leader, then there might be something that you might want to consider. If you again want to chat more, please send your resume to Nicoletta. Please send your resume to me. Even if you're not yet quite sure that, for example, you want to go to Ted Rogers School of Management, well, please send your resume and have that discussion, all right? And see, it's very important that it feels right for you. So if this class feels right, if what you heard feels right, please connect. We are here to help. And if you feel like you might want to do an MBA, have a chat with Nicoletta, come to these events, connect one-on-one, and start going on this journey to at least go with your eyes open and realizing if this is really what you want to do. It's a complicated journey, but it's going to be very rewarding. Well, thanks again. Thanks, Nicoletta, for joining us. It was a pleasure seeing you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you. Some of you will see in our class next week. For some of you, I'll connect with you tomorrow. We'll have a chat. Above all, ladies and gentlemen, just wish you good luck in your applications, good luck in your GMAT. If we can be a small part of it, or we have been a very small part of it today, hopefully, if we can be a small part of this journey, we're going to be very grateful. And I hope to see you soon.
Everyone.
Take care. Have a good night.